What's up, my people? It's time to talk about DOMS. What is DOMS? Muscle soreness. Let's get into it. So I hope everybody's doing well. I don't know even what day it is, as one does after forgetting how many days you've been in quarantine. I gave myself a Corona cut and
that did not work out.
We are going to talk about DOMS today, delayed onset muscle soreness.
Can you even hear me?
What we're going to go through is an article, post-exercise muscle soreness, and whether or not that's a good gauge for muscular adaptations, aka if being sore as hell after a training session means you had a good training session. DOMS is a common occurrence in response to unfamiliar or vigorous physical activity, and it has been noted observationally that many individuals who regularly perform resistance training consider DOMS to be one of the best indicators of training effectiveness, with some relying upon it as a primary gauge. Current theory suggests that DOMS is related to muscle damage from unfamiliar or unaccustomed exercise. DOMS appears to be a product of inflammation caused by microscopic tears in the connective tissue elements that sensitize nociceptors and thereby heighten the sensation of pain. So a nociceptor is essentially a nerve ending that senses pain. Had to think about if I'm actually a neuroscientist for a minute. They're sensory neurons, and they tell your nervous system, hey, this is painful, hey, this is not painful. So nociception is actually really important. So basically what happens during DOMS is you're having a heightened pain experience, essentially. It doesn't say necessarily anything about how good the workout was or the muscular adaptations that happened. It just means you're in pain due to inflammation, and now these nociceptors are now more sensitive. When you go on holidays for like a week or 2 weeks and you haven't trained, or you've been sick, whatever, and then you go back to train and you kind of do too much, you maybe overdo it, and the next day you're like, God, I overdid it, I can't go up the steps. That's what we're talking about here. And essentially it means the stimulus was more than what your adaptation level is at this point. As a general rule, soreness becomes evident about 6 to 8 hours after an intense exercise bout and peaks approximately 48 hours afterwards. However, it's highly variable, so it is an individual experience. However, like a lot of my athletes don't feel it that 6 to 8 hours afterwards. They might feel tired, but it hits 2 days later after they've been forced to do, I don't know, their distance running or running upstairs or whatever extra stuff that they clearly weren't adapted to that isn't actual fitness training. It's just classic soccer stuff that they did in the 80s to make them mentally tough, and that's a different video. Let me not get myself in trouble. We're talking about hypertrophy now. And just so you know, there's two different kinds of like strength training. So we have hypertrophy, which is aimed at growing muscle mass, essentially cross-sectional area. We love that story. Versus maximal strength, where we're doing a lot less reps but a lot higher load. Generally speaking, for soccer players, but pretty much all athletes outside of powerlifters, American football players, bodybuilders, they don't really need that much hypertrophy. They really need the maximal strength. So really, we're talking about DOMS in the sense of hypertrophy, which we'll get to that. It can be postulated that EIMD, or this response, may enhance hypertrophic adaptations, although this theory is far from conclusive. Optimum benefits would be realized from mild to moderate damage. However, an optimal degree of damage from maximizing muscle growth, assuming one does in fact exist, remains to be determined. So we're not even sure if there is a link between DOMS and muscle growth / appropriate amounts of muscle damage, because it could be that maybe DOMS means that you have too much muscle damage, because we're not there that yet in the article, or it could mean that DOMS isn't even related to muscle growth, or maybe we don't need an extreme amount of muscle damage for muscle growth. But what we know is in a hypertrophic state, the goal is to damage the muscles just enough in order for them to heal themselves and then get bigger and stronger to grow more muscle mass. So that's how we think about those correlational links. Now we're going to get into the causation between the two, if there's a link between them. So although DOMS may provide a general indication that some degree of damage to muscle tissue has occurred, it cannot be used as a definitive measure of the phenomenon. So just because you're sore doesn't mean you have muscle damage, and just because you have muscle damage doesn't mean you're getting a huge hypertrophic adaptation. Cool, moving on. Studies show the presence of DOMS after marathon running and long endurance cycling as well. So DOMS is not just present in hypertrophic settings, because if you're a marathon runner, that's aerobic conditioning and endurance work. So you're not training for hypertrophy in the sense of muscle mass. That's not exclusive. That's not a causal link, because if it was, those marathon runners who are really sore for like 3 days after they run, or long distance bikers, they also experience DOMS, but they don't gain mass. These types of exercise are not generally associated with significant hypertrophic adaptations, indicating that soreness alone is not necessarily suggestive of growth. DOMS displays a great deal of inter-individual variability. Needs to be repeated. Super individual experience. Now we're talking about DOMS and bodybuilding. Because the bodybuilders possessed marked hypertrophy of the muscles that are and are not prone to DOMS, it casts doubt on the supposition that soreness is mandatory for muscle development. Soreness is not mandatory for muscle development. Cool. Soreness tends to dissipate when a muscle group is subjected to subsequent bouts of the same exercise stimulus. Because you're doing those exercises repeatedly, if you have a good program, you shouldn't have muscle soreness in the long run. You will likely have muscle growth. Training a muscle group on a frequent basis would reduce soreness, yet still could deliver impressive hypertrophic results. DOMS may negatively affect subsequent workouts in other ways and therefore impede strength and hypertrophic gains. Pain associated with DOMS has been shown to impair movement patterns. Altered exercise kinematics arising from DOMS-related discomfort can reduce activation of the target musculature and potentially lead to injury. DOMS could also reduce the motivation levels involved in subsequent training, reducing exercise adherence. There is some justification to actively seek muscle damage during a training session if maximal hypertrophy is the desired goal. So, for court sport, field sport athletes, again, everybody outside of American football players in some positions, powerlifters, bodybuilders, hypertrophy is not the goal. So why are we even talking about muscle soreness? High levels of soreness should be regarded as detrimental because it is a sign that the lifter has exceeded the capacity for the muscle to efficiently repair itself. The very last sentence of the article is the applicability of DOMS in assessing a workout quality is inherently limited, and it therefore should not be used as the definitive gauge. We cannot use DOMS to gauge whether or not we had a good workout because it's not necessarily linked to hypertrophy. It's also linked to aerobic endurance work. It doesn't mean that you're getting stronger. It doesn't mean that you're getting faster. It doesn't mean that you're getting more fit. DOMS only means that you're having a pain/inflammation response because you did too much. It means that there's muscular damage to an extent that you've overdone it. It's a novel stimulus that you were not adapted to doing, and therefore it actually sets you back, even if you were looking for hypertrophy. But in court sports, etc., we're not looking for how much muscle damage we can get. In athletic training and strength and conditioning, is muscular damage actually the goal? So there's no reason why we should just be making athletes sore for no reason. So if you're sore, brutally sore after your workout, that means you overdid it. It doesn't mean that you're not fit. It just means that that training session was not adapted to your needs, to your fitness, to your level, and it was too much of a stimulus. So I'm not interested and hearing none of these arguments about, I wasn't sore, coach, I wasn't totally wiped, I wasn't puking, so that was obviously a terrible workout. No, that means you went over your threshold. The goal is not to push you over your threshold. The goal is to hit the threshold and bump it up every single time so the threshold gets higher. If you throw yourself over the threshold every single time, you're just doing more damage than you are good. So I like to offer solutions because that's good science. Instead of using DOMS and exhaustion to measure how good our training sessions were, what could we use? How can we measure our fitness from our perspective if we don't have data? Obviously if you're at a first league MLS or Bundesliga club or Premier League, I don't even know, you're going to have all of these performance diagnostics and whatever. But if you don't have that, what now? Trust your coach. If you have a competent strength and conditioning coach, athletic trainer, whatever they're called, wherever you are, a fitness coach, trust them because they should know your program. They should know you as an athlete, and they should be able to write you a program that, again, just bumps that threshold, not throwing you over the threshold. Do your intensity as prescribed. So if you're prescribed 70% effort, do 70% effort. If you're prescribed 100% effort, do 100% effort. But don't go doing no 95% weight on something that is where 70% is prescribed because that's stupid. Intention is also super important. The way, again, to bump that threshold in order to get yourself more fit is to work with intention, to actually put intensity into what you're doing as opposed to, I'm just gonna free ball it, it's cool. You should notice that those workouts begin to get easier. Long-term data is also super important. And like I said, if you're at a top tier club, you probably have all those performance diagnostics. If you're not, something that you can use is how quickly it takes for you to recover. It takes time to see progress. You can't just say this training session was good because I'm sore. Your own measures of fitness, like how you feel, how your motivation is, how your soreness versus pain versus discomfort is, how quick you feel, how strong you feel. There's a lot of great indicators. You just have to be mindful of which ones you're using and actually pick them out. When you have a goal, again, when the goal is fitness, we can't use DOMS to measure fitness because DOMS doesn't measure fitness. If it even measures hypertrophy, hypertrophy is not our method to get fit in sports training. So when you have a goal, make sure that whatever you're using to measure the goal along the way is actually measuring the goal and not the goal adjacent. Again, thanks for listening. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, stick them down in the comments. Stay safe, stay sane, stay inside, and wash your hands. Wash your hands.